Alright, so this passage you should have read Life of Pi, Part 1. So I want to walk you through some of the things of note that'll help you understand the book a little bit more. So first, let's talk about the passage analysis that was assigned last week. So this was the zoo passage. As those of you who turned in the assignment noted, the language does show that Pi definitely likes the zoo. If you hate animals and hate zoos, you can't help but feel a little bit of his passion amongst reading these passages. There's long description, and it seems to go on and on, but it's intentional. The embellished language helps us to understand just how lucky Pi feels. He compares himself to royalty, to a palace. He feels privileged, he feels honored, he feels rich for having grown up in a zoo. And there is that tone shift. People, he says, don't really have a positive opinion of animals in zoos, but Pi contradicts that for sure. So I want you to think about the zoo as a metaphor. So many things in this novel are metaphorical. So on the surface level, it's a great adventure story. So Pi, he's setting this up, but he gets in a shipwreck. Obviously, if you've seen the movie or if you've looked at the book cover or read the passage on the back, he gets on a shipwreck. And so it's a fun adventure story, but there's a couple weird parts of it that kind of jar you out of the narrative. You can get lost in it to an extent, but then you're jarred out of it. So I want you to think about how many of these things can be read as metaphors. So the reason that this is a book that we'd read in AP literature rather than just a beach read is it has parts 1 and parts 3 in it. They're both shorter than part 2. Part 2 is still the adventure story. It's still the bulk of the novel, but part 1 is setting up some things. I know that many people who like this book complain about part 1. They say, why can't we just get to the good part? Like, why do we have to hear about his religions and all this other stuff? The second part is not going to make as much sense in a literary way unless you have read the first part. So a lot of things are being set up. So I want you to think about this zoo as a metaphor. He mentions that animals love being in a zoo, that it's their home, they don't really have a reason to leave. Think about our discussion of existentialism. The way it was discussed, it's almost considering freedom as a burden. So you have ultimate freedom, you're the one that has to decide what to do. That's a lot of stuff to think about. Most people like to be told, in some sense, what to do. So, in that sense, religion or philosophy or any set of beliefs that you kind of stick to is kind of like being taken care of. It's like being in a zoo. You have your healthcare taken care of, you have your meals taken care of, your schedule's already planned, you feel safe, you know someone's looking out for you. It's the same with religion or philosophy or some kind of set of beliefs. Remember when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern weren't exactly sure what they were supposed to be doing, but they knew they were supposed to follow the king's orders. And they said it's kind of nice. It's like having a slice of childhood, like a second helping of childhood. Someone tells you what to do, you don't have to think about it. So in some ways, the zoo is that. And Pi definitely, there's a tone shift where he feels angry. Why do people have this negative impression of zoos? Like they're keeping animals captive. What else would animals rather be doing? Unless you're at the top of the food chain, you're always worried about getting eaten. And if you are at the top of the food chain, you have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. So think about the zoo as a metaphor. Is existentialism a burden? And Pi asked this, and it's kind of interesting to read this during this time because we're all kind of trapped at our houses. Pi said if someone opened the door and said, all right, get out of your house, go somewhere else. Maybe today we'd all go out of our houses because we're tired of being here, but normally we'd say, no, this is my home. Like all my stuff is here. Maybe I'll go out for a couple of minutes or hours or days, but I'll be back, right? The language in this novel, I mentioned in the intro, it's deceptively simple. So I do want you to keep an open mind and kind of keep the back of your mind on. Even if you're getting absorbed into the story, it's an adventure story, it's modern, it's easy to read, it's something that you might pick up for fun instead of being assigned for AP literature. The language is deceptively simple. So Pi's father says, life will defend itself no matter how small it is. Think about Pi as you start part 2 and his time at sea. Um, think about the things that he has to do to survive. Could he have stood up to carnivorous humans, to murder, or carnivorous animals, to murderous humans? Could Pi have done something that wasn't in his nature previously? Can we do things that are outside of our nature in order to survive? Chapters 9 and 10 talk about an animal's flight distance and reasons for wanting to escape. Can that be a metaphor for humans? Do we have a flight distance? Do we have something that spooks us? Do we, like animals, stay where we are unless we have a reason to escape something that we don't like? So if someone opened the door to your house and said, just get out, you don't live here anymore, what would you do? So some vocabulary just to review. To anthropomorphize something, or anthropomorphism, is giving human traits to an animal. So the best example I can think of is Mickey Mouse versus Pluto. If you've seen the Disney characters, Mickey Mouse is anthropomorphized. He wears some clothes at least. He stands upright like a human, he talks, he does human things. Whereas Pluto doesn't. He's just kind of a dog. Goofy, I guess, would be a good example. Goofy is also a dog and somehow is anthropomorphized, but Pluto is not. So Pi likes to anthropomorphize animals. He looks at them, he sees things, he reads into their expressions. Two other terms to know, agnostic and atheist. Agnostic is one who is uncertain. And if you've read part one already, you know that Pi doesn't have a good opinion of people who are uncertain. Agnostics would probably be Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They were very uncertain and non-committal, whereas atheists are ones who definitely don't believe in God or a larger power. Merceau, for example, from The Stranger, could be considered an atheist. They have a strong opinion, and they just, a lot of us see it as a negative opinion, but they do have an opinion, whereas agnostics don't have an opinion. I personally am not making the value judgment that Pi makes, and you should not feel compelled to believe that Pi is judging any of us. So you probably, I don't know anyone who will 100% agree with Pi. In part one, he manages to probably offend anyone who's Hindu, Christian, or Islam or Muslim, because he basically, by practicing all three religions at once, kind of contradicts all three of them as well. So he's not an easy person to agree with or an easy character to agree with. So please don't feel judged as you're reading this book. I'm not saying, hey, look, Pi is right, or Jan Martel, the author, is right. We need to understand what message is being conveyed, but you don't necessarily have to agree with everything that Pi is saying. So just keep that in mind. All right, so part one, prior to the frame story, if you have your novel, your copy of the novel, it's before part one. It's in the Roman numeral pages, and it's in italics. So this is pre-part one. It's a fictional author. This is not Jan Martel. It's a character in the book who's a fictional author who's seeking to write a novel. So he's traveling around trying to get ideas, and he encounters a fictional man. A fictional narrator encounters a fictional man who says, quote, I have a story that will make you believe in God. And then the narrator tells us he's still before part one even starts, but he's kind of fast forwarding and flashing forward, and after the fact saying, I met with Pi, I talked to him, I reviewed all the evidence, and, quote, it was as I listened to that tape. We don't know what tape he's talking about at this point, but he's met with Pi. He listened to some kind of tape that he had, that I agreed this was indeed a story to make you believe in God. So we know that whatever story the narrator, the fictional author, has heard has in fact changed his mind about religion or solidified his mind about religion. So already as a reader, our interest is piqued. But already as a reader, we know that Pi has survived the shipwreck. So the suspense of the story in some ways is taken from us. And so we have to think about why. In this story, the order of storytelling is very, very important. So we already have multiple layers of storytelling, and the novel hasn't really even begun yet. So keep all these layers in mind, and keep in mind the order that you're being told the story. All right, religion. Obviously, this plays a major role in part one, and it plays a major role, honestly, in the meaning of the story. And I said this again, but I just want to reiterate, this novel is not saying that any one religion is better than any others. Pi, any religion that he encounters, he's fascinated by. And honestly, if he met someone of any religion, he would probably adopt that religion as well. He loves the stories that religion brings. So Pi says in paragraph 2, the very second paragraph of the novel, it was the mindful practice of religion that slowly brought me back to life. And he calls his religious practices strange and tells us right away that his majors in college were religious studies and zoology. So, religion and zoology. So we have religion and we have animals. So zoology was one of his majors. He mentions the study of the three-toed sloth. He's very specific. He gives us a lot of details. Again, try to keep an open mind. Many of the details are going to be either symbolic or metaphorical, or he's planting seeds in the reader's mind, subconscious seeds, I remember the original Star Wars. These are not the droids you're looking for. The whole Jedi mind trick. He's kind of doing that. He's planting seeds in our subconscious so that when things happen later on, we're already primed to react a certain way. So he mentions of the three-toed sloth, its demeanor calm, quiet, and introspective did something to soothe my shattered self. He likes that peaceful nature, and the three-toed sloth is a contradiction. If I asked you to come up with, if we were in biology, come up with the 10 traits that an animal could have that would make it survive, probably very few of them, if any, would appear in the three-toed sloth, right? Everything that the sloth does, it seems like, would not lead to its survival. It's super slow, it can't see well, it doesn't have good taste or hearing or anything like that. Um, it's just contradiction. And Pi notes on page 47, later on, chapter 16, that he, like the sloth, is a contradiction as well. The sloth survives by contradicting anything, and Pi, in many ways, does that as well. Pi notes that the sloth's fur contains this algae that changes from brown to green. It's a subtle detail that you could miss, but later on, algae is discussed, and the changing of colors, the changing of characteristics does come into play. And then other contradictions, the goats and the rhinos at the zoo that become inseparable, you wouldn't think that, at first they didn't think the goats were going to survive, but they do. So keep in mind how these are kind of laying the groundwork for what happens later. Richard Parker in chapter 1 is not immediately revealed to be a tiger, so at first we would almost think this is a person. The order in which the story is told is important. So if we understand Richard Parker as a person, we already in our minds are primed. Oh, who's this guy Richard Parker? I guess he was on the ship with Pi and didn't survive, and Pi's sad about him. Later on, he's revealed to be a tiger. But if we knew he was a tiger from the start, we would have a much different opinion of him. When we think he's a human, we're much more sympathetic towards him. He has a human name, after all. When talking about the hippos and zoo in general, Pi says the more you look, the more you see. And this can be a metaphor for the novel in general and also for Pi's outlook in life. Think about the points that Pi makes as a metaphor for humans when he discusses animals. So he says for animals, surprises are highly disagreeable to them. Is that true for us? Do we not like surprises? How about the end of our senior year here? That was a surprise for sure, right? Is this a good thing or is this disagreeable? In general, do humans dislike surprises, especially major ones? Pi compares animals to a knight on a chessboard. Both speak of pattern and purpose, and animals prefer patterns, right? Animals are territorial, they prefer to stay where they are, and they don't escape to somewhere, but from something. Is that how we are too? Do we stay in one place unless we have a reason to escape something? So again, think of animals as a reflection of us. Pi notes, we look at animals and see a mirror. How many of you have pets at home? Have you ever looked at your dog or your cat or whatever pet you have and imposed some kind of emotion? My parents, after my sister and I went to college, I think their two dogs kind of became a replacement for us. And when we first went to college, they would talk about the dogs so much. I could tell they were lonely and missing their daughters and things like that. But they would tell me stories about the dogs, and they couldn't possibly have known these for a fact. Like they would say, "Oh, Sophie," one of the dogs is named Sophie. Sophie was so sad today. She just sat there and looked forlorn. And I'm thinking, dogs mainly sit there all day anyway. And I mean, they don't necessarily look forlorn, but my parents were definitely anthropomorphizing their dogs for a couple years after we went to college. Page 34, Pi claims that he knows that he does this to animals, but he claims that this is conscious. I'm doing it intentionally. I'm never crossing that boundary, kind of like my parents did, where they don't realize that they're doing it. He says, I always realized I was doing it. He mentions that the horrible episode where he had to watch a goat be devoured by Richard Parker definitely helped him to understand the danger of animals. And so I mentioned this earlier. Do we humans, like animals, have a flight distance? When something spooks us, do we run? So zoos and religion. This was part of the passage that I gave you. Pi says, I know zoos are no longer in people's good graces. Religion faces the same problem. Certain illusions about freedom plague them both. So what he's implying here, it's an idea that he plants in our minds, but he doesn't dwell on it that much early on. He just kind of plants the seed. He thinks, or he's telling us that we think we need freedom as humans, that we think zoos and religions restrict us unnecessarily. Do we feel that way? Do you ever go to a zoo or think about zoos and feel that they're cruel the way they keep the animals? But Pi gives us lots and lots of examples prior to this point that he makes about how zoos provide health care. There's no health care in the wild. Animals aren't looked after. Often they have longer um, life expectancies in zoos for some of them. Um, they don't have to worry about food sources. They're not stressed. Is it the same with religion? Do some people think that religions restrict us? But in some ways, do we need that restriction and comfort? So, of course, in all this, there's a discussion of agnostics. So, Pi does not like agnostics. Pi loves everyone, he finds meaning in everything. The real thing that he cannot handle is an agnostic. He calls them muddled. He says they don't know which way is up. In the thrall of reason, that fool's gold for the bright. So, he's saying that anyone that uses reason only, it's like fool's gold. It looks good, but it's not. He says they remind him of the three-toed sloth. They just kind of look up at you, but don't look at you. And um, Pi always comes back to something positive. So he says these agnostics, they're the worst. They remind me of the sloth. But then he goes positive again. He says, oh, but the sloths, they're such a beautiful example of life. And that reminds me of God. So Pi always brings everything to the positive. But the one thing that does rub him the wrong way is agnostics. He says of agnostics, doubt is useful for a while. And he does admit we all need doubt, right? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they had some doubt. We were hoping that they would come around. But Pi says we must move on. To choose doubt as a philosophy of life is akin to choosing immobility as a means of transportation. So he thinks doubt is okay. It's important to test your religion and your beliefs and your philosophy. But he believes, and philosophy or religion to Pi could include atheism. You just have to choose a set of beliefs. You can question them, but according to Pi, you have to commit to something at some point. So I think Pi, if we looked at like Meursault and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Pi would be accepting of Meursault's confidence, but he would probably dislike Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's uncertainty. So Kumar and Kumar. Pi meets these two men with the same name, and he mentions their common names, so don't read too much into it. It was common. One is a biology teacher who basically looks like a math equation or a geometric problem. And to him, each animal at the zoo was a triumph of logic and mechanics. So when Mr. Kumar, the first one, went to the zoo basically for him confirmed what he believed, which was atheism, that religion is darkness, that science is all the answers. And when he looked at animals, he saw proof of his belief. And Pi is disturbed by this at first, but as the novel progresses, you see that Pi sort of accepts atheism as its own kind of religion. It's its own set of beliefs. You have to have faith in some weird way to be an atheist because it can't 100% be proven. And so he does see it as a philosophy or a religion. The other Kumar, the pious baker who leads Pi to Islam, um, he's similar. I mean, they're foil characters, but they both have a deep faith. One has a faith in science, and one has a faith in religion. And so for Pi, they're both very important, and this is why Pi double majors in zoology and religion. To him, both things are kind of a religion. So, again, Pi's many religions, there's lots of details about each experience that led him to adopt Hinduism and Islam and Christianity simultaneously. And of course, everyone he tells this, can't handle it. His parents are really no help. His father is not religious at all. He's as modern and secular as ice cream. Spiritual worry is alien to him. It's financial worry that gets him. And his mother, she had a Hindu upbringing, but a Baptist education, so Pi noticed that they kind of canceled each other out. So his parents are not religious. His mother's a little more tolerant than his father in terms of his um, experimenting with three different religions at once. But really, what Pi's three religions speak to is the power of stories. So think about all the stories that have happened so far in this larger story, Life of Pi. So Pi's name, right? He was named after a swimming pool. His parents didn't even like swimming. They didn't know how to swim. They had no desire to learn how to swim. But they bought into this story that Mama G told about this piscine Molitor in France. And this is a quote, it was the talk that father loved. The more vigorously he resisted actually swimming, the more he fancied it. So the power of this pool that was so amazing and pristine was so powerful that Pi's parents decided to name their son after this pool. I mean, can you imagine? What do your parents love so much in their life that they would choose to name you after it? Like, hey Xbox, or hey PlayStation, or I don't even know. Um, so for a story to be that powerful that his parents chose to name their child after it, speaks to the power of stories. And then his name, of course, doesn't end. And this is his quote: "My name isn't the end of the story about my name." Chapter 5 highlights all the variations and problems associated with his name. And in the end, he takes on the nickname Pi, like 3.14, etc. And this is a quote: "In that Greek letter, in that elusive irrational number with which scientists try to understand the universe, I found refuge." Pi is a never-ending number, and as you examine Pi as a character, think about how that has meaning as well. So every religion that he's adopted comes to him from a story. Quote, "He told me a story." Christianity has one big story. Hinduism has many stories. He's always accepting the stories that he's told. He loves stories. He's fascinated by them. So part 2 is a story. It's the story of his shipwreck. And so kind of read it. I want you to enjoy it for the most part. It's an adventure story. If this were a beach read that we were not going to analyze for AP Literature, it would basically just consist of part 2. So it's just a fun story. Students who have in past years admitted to me that they didn't really finish reading anything that was aside, they have read Life of Pi and said they enjoyed it. So I think you'll enjoy part 2. Do enjoy it, but keep an open mind, kind of keep your subconscious looking for things that are symbolic or metaphorical. And there will be a couple times when you're jarred out of the narrative, and that's okay, and it's intentional. So if you check out the Google Doc this week, there is a short analysis activity for the week that kind of speaks to existentialism and how people find meaning. It's short. It's actually related to a song, although we're looking at it as a poem. So I think you'll enjoy that. So remember, you have until May 20th to read part 2, because part 2 is the longest part in the novel.